So the thing I would say is, I went into Dr. Elaine's program before a lot of these other people, and I would agree that the information and the majority of the popular information on YouTube and all these other social media platforms is that a lot of people are guessing. They're using something that was already, they're just replicating what somebody else said or a recipe. And Dr. Elaine's program really goes into, you know, they go into videos, honestly, of how a ciliate moves versus a flagellate moves, and what a testate amoeba looks like versus an amoeba cyst, and fungal spores and their differences, and really understanding the details about what each one looks like and does in order to understand the differences between healthy soil and unhealthy soil. And I would say a follow-up question to those, with the amount of information that you have from her and then all these other resources, um, including the chemistry, would be, have you seen situations where you had to go in and just fix the biology only, and you didn't have to fix the chemistry, and the system just turned on and then just kept perpetuating itself, and there was really no chemistry that had to be added or amended?
This is where I veer off from Dr. Elaine's statements. And one of her most inflammatory statements is that you don't need to address soil chemistry and then you only need biology. And I think if you understand the journey of Dr. Elaine, you can understand why she makes these claims. She has received an astronomical amount of attack, abuse, and harassment from the chemical camp and the mineral camp. Even John Kemp, who I have a lot of respect for, he took a really shameless jab at Dr. Elaine at the very end as they were ending the last podcast. It's just, I don't know what's up with these dudes and their ego. But I think when Dr. Elaine says that you don't need to address soil chemistry, it's partly an emotional reaction to literally 4 decades of abuse and attack, hacking websites, doing all kinds of ridiculous shit. And I don't think it's a wrong statement. Like I said, the first 2 years in our professional consulting, the only thing we did was correct biology, and we added 30 to 40% on the top of literally the industry leaders that people look up to, hands down. One really famous farm that we worked with in the first harvest, we got them a 30% increase. In the second harvest, we got another 30% increase. And then in the third and fourth harvest, we were able to squeak out like another 18%. That was only correcting biology. That was while soil chemistry was extremely dysfunctional.
Were those in pots or containers, or was that in ground?
Everything. This was an organization that had 2 farms. They had 15, 20, 30 gallon pots and 4x8 beds. And in those soils, I did do a soil chemistry. That was before I was really qualified, but I still was like, look, we need to look at this. And I was outsourcing that work to other agricultural advisors. And like the soil chemistry was so off, my advice was you should throw the soil away. And they didn't want to do that. They ended up taking the time, and which wasn't a bad decision. It just wasn't the way I would have taken it. But you can always create significant improvement in outcomes, all outcomes, potency, yield, growth rates, everything changes for the better when you correct the biology to Dr. Elaine's problem. The obstacle that you're up against with that strategy is that as soon as you start ramping up biology, you start ramping up the consumption and conversion of what is in the soil. So if you're not maintaining soil chemistry, you're going to run out of nutrients faster, plain and simple. So you're going to accelerate yourself to a point that's problematic. On top of that, the predominant narratives for top dressing soil chemistry, I would define as atrocious. They are so incorrect from a soil chemistry management strategy. Most of the mineral top dress strategies, most of the online retailer advices, plain and simple, destroy soils from an Albrecht chemistry standpoint. And so when you go to a cannabis farm that's been following a predominant narrative and you look at the base saturation values of those soils, oftentimes the calcium base saturation is 10 to 15% lower than it needs to be. Sometimes it's 20% lower than it needs to be. Usually magnesium's 2 to 3 times the target. Usually potassium's 2 to 6 times the target. So in that situation, that's where I go, why would you not want to address that? because to me, biology is Dr. Lane's entire life, and I commend her for dedicating so much. I'll be honest, I don't know if I could have made it 4 decades with what she's been through. And so the only reason I keep going through the attacks and abuse that we've received is because she does. And one of the times her and I sat down and I was kind of talking about some of the things that we were going through, and I asked her, I'm like, man, how do you keep doing it through all these website attacks and abuse and bashing? And like when I first got in, there was a website that you would type in Dr. Lane. The first hit on Google was some shit attacking her. And she just plain and simple says, when you know something is right in your heart, you don't stop. And I that's what keeps me going, to be honest. And I kind of got off track a little bit, but it's not my complete identity. My identity is winning races and setting track times. I come from a racing background where I'm trying to win the track championship. In order to push the top of the industry higher than they've ever been, you have to take a holistic approach. We address water chemistry, we address nutrient management, we address soil chemistry, we address biological behaviors, we address cultural practices in the facility. We do everything. And I think that's how you should do it. So if you go to a native soil, if you go to an unfarmed soil, sure, all you need is biology. That's true in that statement. But in my experience, the advice from other areas of agriculture are so incredibly dysfunctional, you have to correct that. You have to. And so to me, it's not a really practical approach, bless her heart. I don't agree with it at all. And the advice I always give is if you're going to come out and be an agricultural advisor and you're going to use the microscope as a tool, you damn sure better learn soil chemistry, because look who's making it. The reason why people keep coming back to me is not a lot of consultants have been all that successful. You look at Nick Tomasini, he is absolutely crushing it. Nick Tomasini had 5-6 years of working on mineral chemistry before he got to Dr. Elaine's courses. He also was somehow involved in the organic certification process. So he had been going to farms. So if you look at me, Nick Tomasini, my wife, Sarah, next to Todd Harrington, we're undeniably the most successful graduates to come out of Dr. Elaine's school. All three of us take a holistic approach and address every aspect of the agricultural process. I think that's why. That's 100% why. And
so that brings us, sorry.
No, you're good.
I don't want to cut you up before you finish. To our next question, which is going to be obviously understanding chemistry and biology is important. Obviously, you learn the biology part in Dr. Lane's program, and then obviously gathering some more information, whether that's books or seminars or something on the chemistry side, is obviously important to your business aspect. But what else would you say that you need to learn from somebody either a pre-graduate or postgraduate of this course, or even the consultant course? They've passed through all that and considered a consultant before opening up for business. What would you suggest? Like, hey, before you just start opening up for business, you probably should learn this, or this, just to make sure that your business plan, all the holes are plugged before your open sign is in the window.
Well, kind of plain and simple is you need to know more about the farmer's process than the farmer, because bless their heart, not one single farmer has been 100% honest about every single thing that they're doing. And so because I had been inside so many cannabis farms during catastrophic crop loss where they were honest with me, I knew what they were actually doing during that explosion. And so when I come into a farm, I have to find visual cues of what they've been doing. What are the bottles on the wall? What do the plants look like? What have they told me? And so you need to know the entirety of what they're doing before you get there to really make an impact, or stand back and just provide microscope analysis to the process. Just be an analytical tool. I think where people really get screwed up is they come out of the course, they're all gung-ho and fired up, and they start telling people how to set up environment. They want to make advice on tractor equipment, and you just need to stay in your lane. And the reason why Sarah and I have become so successful is we just slowly and incrementally added the things that we were professionally qualified to as we felt comfortable. Because at the end of the day, you're supposed to be helping farmers, not putting them out of business. And there's been a lot of people that come out of Elaine's school that literally put farms out of business. There was one guy in particular that was one of Sarah's mentorship students. While Sarah used to be a mentor for the program, I only had one student. I wasn't very good at it, but Sarah was great at it and did a lot of students. And this one particular person was working with a lavender farm. And during the mentorship with Sarah, he just fell off. He just fell off and just disappeared. And like a year later, through a random set of circumstances, we ended up at this lavender farm. And what they ended up doing was the farm had to replant that year. So they spent like $380,000 on new plants. He came in, put in a cover crop, started going gung ho, started watering, doing tea. He wasn't qualified to quantify the tea. He literally killed the entire farm. So it was about a $860,000 bit of damage. And that's the reality of it. That's not the goal. The goal is to only provide benefit. And so you need to, I think, before you offer your services as a consultant, you need to have already tested in your own garden the predominant narratives. It's pretty easy. They haven't changed in years. They're not good. They're phenomenally incorrect from a biological standpoint, any of them. No disrespect to anybody, but they're atrocious. And so you need to know what those things are. Are they following Dragonfly Earth Medicine? Are they following Tim Wilson? Are they following Build a Soil? Are they following Kiss Organics? Are they following K&F? You really need to know K&F because that's really popular right now and it's killing a lot of gardens. And so you need to come in and know how to correct it, what the underlying issue is so you can get right to it. And so you need to do these things in your garden. Go online, find the tea brews that people are following, scroll through the feeds of Instagram and brew those teas and quantify it. Take a soil, do the Clackamas Coot text, find out where the errors are, find out where the opportunities are. You need to know what people are doing so that when you come in, you already know where the sticking point is. You already know what's likely going to be incorrect, and you need to have a reasonable idea of what the path for correction is so that you can execute it in a timely manner. If you can't get all that done, then maintain a second job and just provide analytics. Some of the most valuable bit of work I ever did in my entire life was for an entire year after I became qualified to do the qualitative and quantitative analysis with the microscope. I did free analysis for everyone and anyone that would send me soil, and then we would talk about it. And I would interpret the results. I would tell them what I knew. I would be honest about what I didn't know. And then they would be honest to a reasonable degree about what they were doing. And that was hands down some of the most valuable work experience I've done in my entire life. Because when I started offering my professional services, like the first farm we went to in 2016 that was a commercial farm, they were doing the Clackamas Coot Tech. I had already done the entire thing. When I showed up, I knew what was wrong. I knew what to correct.
Sure.
I knew what aspect to pull out of the equation, and I knew what to put in to correct it. You look like a hero, And the funny thing is the predominant narrative from that camp hasn't changed much. So what I did in 2016 to correct that farm, people are still doing wrong. And so the opportunities for other people to make positive impact are literally unlimited at this point because the breadth and scope and expansion of these popular trends are far outpacing the graduates from the school. And so there's literally an unlimited amount of work to correct things. You just need to be familiar with the technique. You need to feel comfortable with the technique and correcting it so you can just come in and execute.
So practicing the trade of what you learn and trying the trend recipes that most people can't tell you what your end result is data wise, just practicing all of the different ones that way, because the farmer's looking at the same recipes and they're trying them out, but they don't obviously know what the result is. So the only result is the risk that they're taking on the plants and whether being successful or neutral or completely killing their plants by throwing something off. So I guess advice for me and everybody else that's kind of in that gray area at this point is practice. Don't charge any money if you really don't know what you're doing, because obviously then you have not only the legal liability possibly, but also the moral liability of you just screwed somebody over because you weren't ready. And so I do kind of feel that like you had said, I had even talked to some of my neighbors, letting them know, hey, I know how to test soil. I'm not going to charge you for this because I just graduated school. And in the same aspect of anybody graduating school, if they just got out of a law school, they're not going to go stand in front of a judge and Johnny Cochran to go litigate. I mean, they're not going to have the experience to really get through that. So,
Mhm.
in kind of the aspect of practice, what Dr. Lane says toward the end of her seminars, which is practice, practice, practice. Get good at knowing what you're doing. Make it almost second nature, as opposed to, hang on a second, let me flip through my notes here and figure out what's going on. It's more or less, I have all these experience. At least what you're saying is a year of experience, a year of just getting out there, testing soil, getting notes, quantifying data, maybe making some spreadsheets, and really getting in the groove of starting a business, even though you're kind of doing it for free.
Mhm.
And I completely agree with that, because
Mhm.
I feel like if you get a lot of people that just graduate this school and then jump in and then screw something up, they're probably just gonna step away forever, which is not really what we want.
No, no, and it doesn't help the overall movement, and that does happen a lot. People come out of the school, they're gung ho, and they start giving advice that they're not qualified to do. And the reason why I say do for free in the beginning is just like you said. If you're a doctor, what's the first thing they make you do? A residency. If you're an attorney, what's the first thing they make you do? Intern. And you need repetitions in sports. I call it going to the batting cages. I have a long sports history. I used to do high level athletics. We sent kids on to NCAA Division I schools that set national records. Like, you have to go to the batting cages. And the reason why I say don't charge in the beginning is because it starts you from a place of humility. It starts you from a place of being humble. And if you come in just inquisitively, non-emotionally, without the pressure to pay your bills, you're more inclined to behave appropriately and not put the farmer into a compromised state, which is really number one. And over time, you will gain that confidence. And I believe that if you start out with it not being out about the money will come. And the money comes when you execute well and consistently without blowing farms up. And you just don't be afraid to let it take a process. Like I said, I approached this like it was a college degree. I wasn't afraid to let this 16-week course be 4 years of development with 2 years of upper graduate degree. I wasn't afraid to let it be a lifelong journey. And I think,
Mhm.
what's kind of crazy for me is when I took Dr. Elaine's school, it was after I had closed down a very successful construction business, started a second business, and failed my ass off. And I found myself in an extremely compromised state. I had a wicked head injury. I was waking up, and didn't know my name. It was an extremely difficult time for me. And at that time, I wasn't even looking like, man, I would love to make my construction business money again. I was just like, man, I need a way to survive. And if I get this technical trade certificate, I might be a valuable employee at a cannabis farm. That was my original goal. My original
Mhm.
goal was to, as regulation was moving through California, that I would be a desirable employee that had a decent wage, that had a specific skill that nobody else did. That was what I originally
Mhm.
shot for.
Mhm.
And in the most humble way possible, the reality is Sarah and I are changing the face of cannabis and agriculture on the planet. And we've provided advice to farms around the world. 2 years ago, I got invited to Macedonia to meet with their vice president of the entire country at the State Department to brief them on what was working and what was not working in the state of California and in the United States in regulated cannabis as they open their emerging program. Like, I sat down with the number two in command of a country to brief them on what is happening in cannabis because I was brought there by another advisor. Essentially, they just said, bring who else you think will be most valuable. And so they didn't know who I was, but we had seen so many problems. I was able to give a very critical, analytical cost per square foot failure rating, essentially. And because of the experience I have. And my original goal was to be an employee that made more than $20 an hour. That was my first goal,
Mhm. Yeah. So
and, you
humble
know,
beginnings, like you said.
mm, and maintain
So
humility. That's been hard for me. I've had points where my egos kick me in the nuts and, it gets rearranged here and there. But I mean, it was hard not to let your head get big when you're adding 30 to 40%, literally the top 1% of the industry. Like literal famous people paid for by rappers trust the analytics that I provide. And, you know, that, you know, everybody has their moment with
Hmm.
that, but, you know, maintain humility and know why you're doing something, and don't be emotionally attached to something. You know, let the data speak. And that's one thing that Elaine does not get enough credit for, is she is constantly evolving her strategy. The only thing that doesn't change is her view on mineral chemistry, but I've already defined why.
Hmm.
And like she's in court, like some of the things that she teaches in the courses are things that Sarah and I came up with. She's got her ear to the streets. She's got her ear to the people doing the day to day. And if something comes in
Hmm.
that's a better strategy, man, that gets put right in the program. And
Yeah. I
you
did
you
I
know,
did appreciate that about her.
mhm,
During small points during the segment, she would
mhm,
say, "Well, this is something that a research student at a university may do if you want to go more in depth of that, or this has the aspect of having more research is needed for this direction. So this is where once you acquire these skills, go out there and go make new discoveries
mhm.
with your microscope and how the system works." So that's the thing I appreciate about Elaine is she is very open-minded to the additional feedback that she's training us in order to quantify and then bring that back to the forum to say, hey, I made this discovery. I have this on video now of these
Mhm.
microbes doing something that we didn't know that they did. And so
Mhm.
that's one thing I did appreciate about her as well.
Yeah, and if more people in the industry behaved like that, we would be way further ahead than we are now. And I think that's something that the other influencers in the industry should take note of, because the reality is, like, there's people in the industry that have been providing advice that's very widespread that we've shared our analytics of their process with. Like, there's one particular person that gives advice that we showed them. It was extremely problematic in 2017. I defined it 3 times in person with literally face-to-face conversations of how problematic their advice was, the financial cost to it, what I do to correct their bad advice, and they haven't changed shit. And you know, I I think Dr. Elaine needs way more credit for evolving with what is in front of her and reacting to, improvements of even her own advice. And other
Mhm.
influencers in the industry should take note. And that's where I think the greatest benefit of working with Dr. Elaine directly, because I picked that up from her. I
Mhm.
picked up
Mhm.
the fact that it's okay to evolve. I picked up the fact that it's okay to say, you know what, this is the way we used to do it, but we're finding that there's a better way and there might be some problems. And other people in the industry that are influencers don't do that, plain and simple. There's a lot of
Well, this
egos involved.
I think this brings us kind of to our
Mm-hmm.
next step, which um, we're both entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually in the automotive industry, dabbling in this industry to kind of create another business. But which leads us to our next question, which is if we were going to outline the steps needed before somebody could open up their own agricultural consultant business, what steps would that be? And first, I wanted to kind of preface that um, opening up your own business means being an entrepreneur, which, as you know, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot more than just the job that you're doing that you obviously have to acquire and the self skills that you have to acquire to be on task and to your scheduling, all the things with insurance, your liabilities, your business profile. Make sure you have a good accountant, an attorney base, just in case you have any legal questions, those kinds of things. And I think that when you had said that your goal was originally to become an asset of an employee at a certain, and that could be cannabis,
Mm-hmm.
it could be just your local market garden,
Mm-hmm.
it could be really anywhere. But if you get a start somewhere, and as opposed to just opening up your own business because you're a recent graduate with these new skills, I mean, maybe you can elaborate on that. On being an entrepreneur is much harder than people think, and maybe starting off as just a really sought after employees may be the first goal.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part. Like I feel like I was groomed since birth to be a small business owner. I have 3 uncles that started businesses from nothing. I don't come from a generational wealth family. I come from a family that manufactured their own generational wealth through small business. So I have 3 uncles that started with absolutely nothing and turned those into multi-million-dollar a year businesses through my childhood. And so I have only been focused on small business. My degree is in small business administration with an emphasis in finance. That was critical. I started a construction business when I was 24 and was very successful. That was critical. But as far as my soil food web journey, I think what really made me successful was in that beginning time, I already had the cannabis experience, so I got into it. And there was a guy that was managing a lot of property. And the first work I got was providing analytics for other consultants that were struggling with regulated processes. So they were getting their ass kicked by new things that they hadn't met in the black markets of cannabis. And so I was working underneath them quietly, work I can never talk about because it's, their work essentially. But I essentially would come in and tune up everything that they were doing. One of those farms I worked at for 8 months on a day-to-day. And he did allow me to do some consulting. But once I really started being traveled to commercial farms and markets he was consulting in, that's when he cut it off, because cannabis people especially are really afraid of competition. They'll cut your leg off. But that was extremely valuable information. I worked there day to day, 40 plus hours a week for 8 months. Sarah would come once a week and do analytics, and I tuned up his entire process. That was essential for my survival. And so if I were to go back again and I ultimately wanted to be a business, I would try to be an employee somewhere first, whether that's a food farm, whether that's a cannabis farm. I chose cannabis because there's 4 harvests in a calendar year and you can make one change and so I learned 100 years of farming in 1 year working with one organization that I would have learned through food crops. And you have to know the day-to-day because the farmer's not going to tell you everything. You need to be there seeing, doing, executing, getting your hands dirty. I think if you have a job first, it also takes the pressure off surviving as a business. People still aren't super comfortable paying for this information. They still, because people are so quiet, people don't talk about the benefits we've provided. So the market's still kind of like, is this helpful? So the demand is changing radically every day. I think more and more people are talking about the benefit. I'm starting to be more public about what we do, which I think helps drive the market. But it's still kind of in its infancy, so to speak, of people really adopting it widespread. And so it's going to take time. And if you're only providing microscope analysis at $60, $100, $150 a sample, it's really difficult to be financially viable with just that strategy. You need site visit rates. You need monthly payment fees. You need different revenue streams, so to speak. And I think I would first focus on the day-to-day. I would get myself a small business education, and then I would try to form alliances. I think the greatest reason why Sarah and I were successful is we're both capable of doing the microscope analysis. Dr. Elaine herself said to our face, we were literally doing things for the first time. Dr. Elaine has 4 decades of it, but because she's just by herself, she's setting up the tea brewer, she's doing the extract, she's doing the microscope. Sarah and I were able to do real time, boom, 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 boom. I would set up the tea brew, she would do the microscope, we would swap, and we were just I remember one project, we did 28 microscope samples in a 4-day site visit. And then we sat down with Dr. Elaine. I was like, how do we aggregate this information? She's like, this is first, kid. I don't know, figure it out. And so we had to figure out ways to aggregate all this data. And so I think forming alliances would be really good. I would try to find somebody else that's also capable with the microscope analysis and figure out a way you can tackle projects together, or at least tackle experimentation together. That could be from a distance as well. So I have really solid alliance with Nick Tomasini. He's been extremely beneficial to my overall development because he had the chemistry background. I was able to provide him successful advice because we had a couple years of practical application. And that is a relationship that gives back and forth. Same with Eli. Eli and I have a very symbiotic relationship. He's more in the large ag pasture range, so he bounces things back off me. I bounce things off him. Forming alliances is key, in my opinion. If you're just out there as one person by yourself, it's going to be a tough road. You need to be able to form alliances to accelerate your understanding and movement, in my opinion. And you just got to get the reps, man. You got to go to the batting cage. Like when you show up to a farm, you have to know what they're doing, and then you have to know the business and work incrementally as you go up. So, to be honest, in the first year or so, we didn't have the contracts needed to do the type of work we were doing at the commercial scale. And we ran into some shady ass people, to be point blank. Excuse my language, but there's some shady folks out there. And especially in commercial cannabis, you're dealing with every type of business, every type of business owner, every type of wealthy person, every type of investor. Just that in of itself is difficult to manage. And, move up slowly and incrementally with things that you feel comfortable with. And I think we've talked a lot about cannabis. I think it's important to note that I have literally done everything. We have worked with 6,000 acres of corn and soy. We have worked with famous botanical gardens. We have worked with city parks and rec. We have worked with golf courses. We have worked with landscapers. We have worked with shopping centers with dying palm trees. I just choose to do cannabis because so far, they're fairly closed-minded, but of the agricultural world, they're the most open-minded to soil food web techniques.
Sure.
When we worked with 6,000 acres of corn and soy back in 2016, they weren't ready. I would say last year was the first year that I started seeing food farmers like really ready. We worked with a grape farmer that was, 35 years of conventional farming, was ready to dive in. He ended up going through Elaine's courses. He's now full-blown gone through the consultancy. Sarah and I helped him last season. There's another farmer in Southern California that's not even organic, but he's implementing the biological techniques with no desire to be organically certified. But the farmers are waking up to this. And so we jumped into cannabis to get repetitions, 4 harvests in a calendar year, multiple properties, multiple states around the world. And if you're only working in food crops, you're never going to catch up to me in cannabis because of the repetitions we get. You're just never going to catch up.